When Fidel Castro came to power in Cuba as a result of the Cuban Revolution in 1959, relations between the United States and Cuba dissolved, resulting in decades without diplomatic relations between the two countries. The United States and its leaders had taken an isolationist approach in dealing with Cuba, cutting political ties, imposing economic sanctions, and restricting American travel to the island, due in part to Cuba's support of a communist regime, as well as the complete disregard of human rights by the Cuban government. This realist position imposed by the U.S. indicated that they had no intentions of changing or amending this policy unless Cuba made efforts to help the people of their country by implementing a fair and inclusive form of government. That was until President Barack Obama made this statement in 2014.
Today, the United States of America is changing its relationship with the people of Cuba. In the most significant changes in our policy in more than 50 years, we will end an outdated approach that for decades has failed to advance our interests, and instead, we will begin to normalize relations between our two countries. Through these changes, we intend to create more opportunities for the American and Cuban people and begin a new chapter among the nations of the Americas.
Not long after announcing this policy alteration, President Obama and his family traveled to Cuba in March of 2016, a country where no U.S. president had been since Calvin Coolidge in 1928. The purpose of this meeting was to discuss with President Castro the differences between the countries and how some common ground can be reached. The change to a more liberal policy, as the president said, comes after recognition that years of U.S. isolation of Cuba have failed to accomplish the objective of empowering Cubans to build an open and democratic country. The goals of this policy change are to reestablish diplomatic relations, empowering the Cuban people and their rights within the country, facilitate an expansion of U.S. travel to Cuba, and end human rights violations occurring on the Cuban people. However, many people, especially those from the Cuban dissidents movement, are unhappy with the president's change in strategy. These people saw firsthand the atrocities that occurred under the direction of the Castro family and are appalled that the U.S. is attempting to mend relations with the same leadership that brought harm to thousands of people in the first place.
Obama traidor! Obama traidor! Obama traidor!
Obama is a traitor, shouted these older Cuban Americans as they minced no words at a protest near Little Havana today. President Barack Obama's announcement that the United States and Cuba would begin moving towards diplomatic relations for the first time in 53 years, still making some people's blood boil.
Those from the dissident movement feel that the U.S. is giving in to the Cuban government, while Cuba will continue its policies of oppressing its people and harming those who attempt to stand in its way. Protests against the regime have remained popular, however, with many people going on hunger strikes, creating groups to raise awareness for the human rights violations, such as the Women in White movement, along with others attempting to create alternative political parties. The passion of the Cuban dissidents can be felt in these next two statements.
Así que es minimizante a un grado tal que si ellos no te matan, eres capaz de matarte tú. O por millones de situaciones, desde la borrachera hasta los últimos vicios. Todo por razón de escapar de una isla donde no se puede escapar. Donde hay que comerse lo que Él te ha dado, porque no hay nada más lo que Él te ha dado. De esa forma, Señor, yo no creo que pueda haber reconciliación.
Obama dijo en una ocasión que él vendría a Cuba cuando en Cuba se respetaran los derechos humanos, cuando hubiera cambios en materia de derechos humanos. Quisiera que el presidente Obama me dijera si en estos momentos, esto que él está viendo, 46 domingos seguidos recibiendo golpes, llevados a calabozo, esposadas, si eso es respeto a derechos humanos.
The question of how to deal with policy in Cuba has grown exponentially this past week with the death of Fidel Castro, as those from the Cuban dissident movement and people around the world celebrate the death of one of the most notorious dictators of the 20th century.
Contento, alegre. ¿Cómo no se va contento? Sentir alegre. Se murió, finalmente.
I guess I shouldn't be happy because a person has died, but he separated my family. My parents never got to see Cuba again, so today I rejoice for this.
Even though President Obama and the people of the Cuban dissident group want improvements for the country's citizens, each actor has different methods and strategies for going about this. President Obama is trying to work with what he has been given, using more liberal policies to enact change in a country where change has seemed to be an impossible task. While Obama is trying to mend broken relationships, The Cuban dissident group believes change will only occur with new leadership and a new system of government. It is hard to disagree with them after seeing what the track record looks like. How are the people of Cuba supposed to trust a family that has been responsible for so much misery and suffering over the past 50 years? Looking at a state actor like President Obama, as well as a non-state actor like the Cuban dissident group, allows us to see how different viewpoints can lead to approaches for those involved in an issue. It will be interesting to see how the situation develops in Cuba and which actor is more successful in bringing about the change that they desire.